me when I record that I need to warn you that you're being recorded. So you're being recorded. Just always expect that these class sessions will be recorded. And again, the point with that is that I'll be posting I'll be posting these sessions to YouTube, and then you can go at a later date and look at those sessions. If for whatever reason you miss the class meeting. It's also actually kind of going to be cool for you. I know we hate watching ourselves. At least most of us do. Hate watching ourselves on video, but it can be a really useful learning experience to kind of see like what does it look like when you are presenting. You can get some of that meta feedback that you can't otherwise get. I actually wrote a paper on that once. That there is a real value, as painful as it is, to watch or listen to recordings of yourself, because you get a view of yourself that you don't normally get. You get that outside view, and you can really improve. The paper I wrote was in the context of playing music. Musicians, listen to themselves, learn things about themselves that they didn't know, that you can't really remember or notice in the moment, that you'll notice from a recording. So don't be scared of the recordings. Embrace whatever you can get out of the coronavirus. Okay, and so today the plan is I'm going to talk relatively briefly, about Aldon Morris's paper. And I'm sorry, there was a typo. This is chapter 20 of the, what is this book called? It's called The Social Movements Reader, Godwin and Jasper. Talking about chapter 20 today. And then I'm going to have us do synchronous work in the forums on Moodle as a pre-midterm, or I guess as a midterm review. So yeah, at some point you'll want to open a window for Moodle. But for now, I'm going to talk about tactical innovation in the civil rights movement, this Al Morris chapter, and just kind of a couple things as a preamble to know Aldon. Who's Aldon Morris? He is, this is his wheelhouse. This work on I guess to some extent critical race studies, but really more the study of the civil rights movement specifically, and I guess sort of this a bit of a history of African American intellectuals. So Morris made a bit of a splash last year with his book on W.E.B. Du Bois. I don't really buy the argument. It's an interesting book. The argument is that Du Bois is a sort of did all sorts of really important stuff for sociology that really got under-recognized. Du Bois definitely did lots of important stuff for sociology, has become recognized over time, but unfortunately was excluded from the academy formally. Anyway, that's more or less an aside, just to kind of give you a sense of who Al Morris is. He's also, though, notably, especially for the sociologists in the room, he is the incoming president of the American Sociological Association. So that's that's mostly a it's not a political thing, right? It's mostly a honorific title given to the sort of the leading scientists, the leading sociologists of their generation. So people think Al Morris is hot shit. They're probably right. And this is just a little bit of his output that we're looking at today. Now I'm going to be switching on my screen to a different window, so I won't be necessarily following along with the chat. If you have questions, well, that's why I said probably even better. Ooh, my hand's huge. Look how big my hand. Sorry. It's probably better if you chime in over voice if you have questions, because I might miss things in the chat window. Is it here or here? I don't know. It's flipped for me. Right, that's backwards for me, but that's right ways for you. So I think it's over here, right? Certainly, though, if your mic's not working or if you want to ask questions via chat, please do that, and I'll check that periodically. Otherwise, if you come in over voice chat, I should be able to hear you. Now, the thing with the Morris reading, I'm kind of putting him. Putting a square peg in a round circle today. The article is largely, as he frames it, about rational action and tactical innovation, and how a movement develops and deploys new tactics and draws on certain kinds of resources, really in a resource mobilization vein, to deploy tactics, to make those tactics work towards social change. Obviously, the case at hand, the specific case, is sit-ins, is the lunch counter sit-ins of the early 1960s. And if you'll join me for a moment, you can either look at this on Moodle, or I'll present the Moodle now. But if you go to Moodle, if you go to Moodle, you will see I've provided a link there. If you're not familiar with this lunch counter sit-in business of the early 60s, you can just take a quick look at what this looked like. Although these aren't necessarily. So this is the Moodle. You can either watch along with me or open this for yourself in your own window. This is preparation and protest in Virginia in 1960. This is really showing the people and places and activities that Morris is talking about, where they were training young men and women to sit at a lunch counter and experience harassment, and do that using essentially the principles of satyagraha, right? The Gandhian nonviolent civil disobedience. And as you see in this title photo here, to experience really kind of horrific harassment. So these are people blowing smoke in the face of a protester, right? This is second image is an image of people, waiting to do the protest, but being shut out by a lawn chair. Kresge's, which was a department store, right, decided to just not let them sit at all. Or some images of them sitting or having things spilled on them, right? This was an important, framed as later, an important step in the civil rights movement. So you see Dr. King was directly involved in this and encouraging these kinds of protests. And I think, though, that this doesn't really, this particular slideshow doesn't even really show you, really kind of how horrible the protests did get, and they made for some real, I guess, iconic images, of these protesters being attacked and having sugar and coffee poured on them by white racists, and mostly in the South, right? So you see, this is a map here of where the sit-ins went on. They were here in Tampa and St. Petersburg, as well as the more famous ones in South Carolina. So that's just, again, you can kind of go back to that as you wish to see what the movement looked like. And I'm going to stop presenting now and go back onto paper. I'm not seeing questions. Okay, good. Well, not necessarily good. If you have questions, chime in with questions, please. Okay, so the way he's framing this is basically to say, there's a rational action going on here, and there are specific resources that people are drawing upon to deploy their tactics. So I'll try to bring a black pen on, the next time we have a lecture, because this doesn't show up so great, but I think you can read that. Is that correct? So that says resources, tactics. Now, should I turn off the light? Would that help? Let's see. No, that can't help. Oh yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, cool. Got rid of the glare. Okay, so talking about the resources and tactics that Morris concentrates on, and again with all these specific readings, right? I'm not necessarily interested that you know all about the sit-ins and the civil rights movement, but that you can draw upon the kind of lessons, use this as exemplary of, in this case, really, he's providing exemplars of resource mobilization and social networks and specific protest tactics. We'll come back to tactics later on in the semester. But I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna do the kind of the square peg thing today and talk about frame analysis, because we can do this. We can use frame analysis to understand a bit of what's going on here with the sit-ins. But just to present what Morris has to say first, what are the resources and tactics, or the resources that the tactic of sit-ins depended upon? First and foremost, probably, is churches, right? As you can see in those Life magazine images from the 60s, these meetings are going on in churches. They're providing, just basically an institutional infrastructure to the movement. Networks. And essentially here, networks of organizers. And we've seen this a little bit before, right, in the article on the McAdams article on the Freedom Riders. The success of the movement depended in part upon there being these pre-existing networks of different social movement organizers, also on, just friend networks, people who could say like, hey, I'm going to Mississippi this summer. Do you want to come along? People, who had been at like Stanford participating in whatever kind of movement organizations they had there. So people draw upon their network to get more people in, and we see this clearly with the sit-ins. The different organizers already existed, especially in groups like the NAACP. Right, back to Du Bois. This is an organization co-founded by Du Bois, and the Congress on Racial Equality. Right, so having these people there, to talk about and share tactics, is key. Is super important. Rational planning. And I think again, with some of this stuff, what year is this from? It's from 1984. This funny sort of mythos arose around the civil rights movement, kind of in the subsequent 20 or so years, after the great successes in the Civil Rights Acts of 64 and 65. By the 80s, what people were remembering, or how people were remembering the civil rights movement, was to sort of basically look at it as, these pissed off black people had just had enough and they couldn't take it anymore. And so, the story, especially this kind of became the story of Rosa Parks with the Montgomery bus boycott. The story was like, Rosa Parks was just a tired black woman who wasn't going to take it anymore. And Morris seems to be confronting a similar narrative with the lunch counter sit-ins. It was just like, and black kids had just had enough of not being able to go to Woolworths and sit at the lunch counter. And he's saying that's really not the story. I mean, yes, obviously black people had enough, but really had enough with Jim Crow in general. And if you look at that Life photo essay, they're talking a lot, in their signs about Jim Crow in general, about the racist infrastructure of the South. And the lunch counters are just merely one tactic in an overall program of dismantling Jim Crow, of eliminating the structures of white supremacy in the South. And so what Morris is really taking pains to show here is, it's not spontaneous. Right? It's not, trying to figure out where the camera is, right? It's not spontaneous in terms of, it's not just people saying, we're pissed off, we're not going to take it anymore, and let's just sit down at the lunch counter and wait until they try to throw us out. That will somehow show people how stupid segregation is, or something like that. No, right? It was not spontaneous, it was strategic. There's this strategy amongst the organizers worked out in, church annexes and basements to try to figure out, what is a good tactic for this movement that is going to really play up the inhumanity and the foolishness of Jim Crow. And of course, on a certain level, you think about lunch counters, you don't think about lunch counters. We don't hardly have this anymore. I mean, it's really, it's kind of a silly, antiquated thing. You're like, what's the big deal about lunch counters? That's not really anything like the main thrust of Jim Crow. The thrust of Jim Crow is a lack of access to jobs, a lack of access to educational institutions, a lack of access to the courthouse, these kinds of things that make like real material differences in people's lives. It's like, yeah, it's nice to be able to go to a lunch counter, but that's not really the fundamental problem in Jim Crow is who can eat at what lunch counter. But it is an extraordinarily public display. It really puts in the front of people, of everyday people, of everyday Southerners, but then through Life magazine coverage and other kinds of coverage, the fact of like, oh wow, like life really is different and problematic, and exposes then this whole other raft of problems with Jim Crow that people might not have been thinking about. So this really is a strategy, and he mentions things like, we're using young people to do this. I mean, and sometimes like high school age kids, right? These are people, who pose no threat to anybody, but now you have, and you see, again, in other photo essays, just how ridiculously, virulently, violently people react to them. And specifically, and this is again sort of a broad point, resource mobilization kind of point to take from the sit-ins, is that they involve workshops. So not only are you strategizing about the kinds of techniques that you're going to be using, you are teaching people in the use of those techniques, right? So, again, against the spontaneity argument, the argument is these protesters have been taught how, and again, you see in the Life essay, how to be a lunch counter protester. There's a specific way to do it because, as you could imagine, or at least I would imagine, if somebody is blowing smoke in your face, your first reaction is at least to try to avoid that, maybe to get out of there. If somebody is pouring sugar, milk, coffee on you, you want to become violent, right? We tend to respond to violence with violence. So we actually need this training to say, like, this is the united front that we're going to put up. This is how our protests are going to look. So, again, what Morris is really taking his pains to show here is just how strategic this whole thing is and how well planned. Now, where I want to take that, and kind of this is, feeding towards the midterm, right? And how we're going to be using our core concepts. I want to think a bit about this in terms of frame analysis, right? So going back to that Benford Snow kind of stuff that Almeida was talking about in, I think, chapter 5 there. Excuse me. We can sort of tease out here several different framing processes that go on, really wrapped up in the tactic of sit-ins. So, first of all, want to think about frame amplification. So frame amplification is when you're taking a frame that already exists in one context and moving it into another context. Or you take a frame from one part of culture and apply it to movement activities. And where he shows this going on, I put it down as page 223. Where is this? Where he talks about the churches. All right, so all right, so this is his point 6 on page 223. An adaptation of a rich church culture to political purposes. So that church culture, and you can see this in, I mean, he talks about what spiritual sermons and prayers were used to deepen the participants' commitment to the struggle. You know, and you can really specifically talk about, and we have talked about this a bit, you know, sort of in the context of spirituals like we shall overcome, or we will overcome, as it originally was framed. You take these notions, and especially in the Black church through the 60s, the emphasis being on often on the Mosaic passages, Exodus, but also again, it depends on how up on your Bible you are. I'm only vaguely up on my Bible, but like so there's Exodus, which probably many of you read in Human Experience. You remember, Moses leads his people out of slavery. The frame amplification there is, here you have this biblical story that, seemingly, is literally applied to 5,000 years ago. We can apply this to the situation of African Americans. And so this was, originally, in the pre-bellum, the pre-Civil War era, applied specifically to the idea of African Americans escaping from slavery, but now that same narrative can be used, in the notion of African Americans escaping from Jim Crow. And so again, this is an amplification. You take those church cultures, you apply them to contemporaneous political processes. Another important thing that we see going on here, I would argue, is frame transformation. Basically, when we're talking about frame transformation, we're talking about trying to get people to view something in a new way. Often, it's about getting people to view something that they would see as unproblematic and view it as being problematic. Of course, you see this in a lot of the PETA activities, right? The idea of, some of their stuff is kind of wild, right? There's the whole kind of meat is murder campaign, but then they did something, I forget how specifically it worked. They did something to try to give people the idea that fish are not much different than bunny rabbits and stuff. So, that you're causing great pain to fish by fishing. So think of them like you would think of a bunny rabbit. That's, an example of transformation. Think of this thing, which seems really normal to you, in a whole new light. And basically, with Morris's example here with the sit-in, the example is to say that the sit-in is showing Jim Crow generally, right? Not just lunch counter segregation, but Jim Crow generally as any number of things, right? As inhumane, as bizarre. I think there's too many Z's in that, but I'll stick with them anyway. As inhumane, as bizarre, or even just as stupid or ridiculous. By making a spectacle of this practice, the effort is here to get people to think about this practice, to think about it differently, to transform how they frame Jim Crow, and especially, I think, for Southerners, to transform it from a natural part of everyday life to a problematic part of everyday life, or maybe of something that should not even be part of everyday life. There's also at least some degree of prognostic framing. Going on here, prognostic framing generally being, saying that, this problem that we've framed can be solved. There are tactics that can solve this problem, and this is the sort of the work that's going on in those church basements, right? So seeing Jim Crow as the problem that can be solved through the tactic of sit-ins. And that's a problem. That's an important thing for movements in general to deal with. If you want to get people to act along with you, you've got to convince them that those actions will be successful. And of course, after the victories of the mid-'60s, a number of people saw really didn't believe that things were progressing fast enough, especially in terms of the economic position of African Americans. And you saw a lot of folks get turned off from those kinds of nonviolent tactics. And you saw a number of people, embrace more radical or even militaristic tactics. So that's essentially the story of the Black Panthers. People did not buy in, or at least some groups of people did not buy into this prognostic framing any longer. And finally, I'd like us to think about, and this is more, I would say, sort of an aside or adjacent in Morris's article. Obviously he's not directly problematizing any of this, but this is kind of more of an aside. The motivational framing. Even having convinced people that a tactic will be successful, there's often, this is, again, it goes back to the free rider problem. And you can think of almost any of our movements in this way. It's like, I understand that fine, meat is murder, but like I'm not gonna I don't know, splash blood on people who are buying meat at a lunch counter, right? It's like, they'll let somebody else do that. Like, I believe that tactic will work, but me, yeah, I got other things to do. I got games to play on my phone or something. You have to find some way of motivating people, encouraging participation. Certainly, partly that comes from the church culture of saying, you as one of God's children have some duty to right wrongs that you see, but also, especially here, and again, this is something that's similar to the Freedom Summer article, to McAdams' work. Peers are incredibly important. So again, the network comes in here. And I think, I talked to you guys, use the farcical example at one point of Dennis from It's Always Sunny, right? How he joined both pro-choice and pro-life protests because of wanting to hang out with attractive people. That's that in and of itself can be a motivation for people to join a movement. Not necessarily in that farcical sense, but in that sense of wanting to do something with people. There is great motivation. Talk about lessons we learn from coronavirus. The number of people who seem to otherwise be getting along with the stay at home, stay inside, whatever kind of thing, but then at the end of the day they've got to go congregate with people in parks, which is, from a public health standpoint, a really terrible thing. From a social community sociological standpoint, it's a really kind of a great thing. You're like, yes, people still need human contact. Like, Zoom meetings don't do it all. People love being with people, and you especially love being with your friends. So if people in your network are participating, you're much more likely to participate. And again, I forget who was talking about the workers movement, the folks in San Francisco, right? And cults in general, are often doing this thing of hey, let's hang out, find the new guy in town who seems kind of lonely. And, I got this group, come on. And it turns out that, all of a sudden you go to their house and it's a crazy cult. By the way, I'm recommending to everyone, if you haven't been watching Tiger King, watch Tiger King. Great. There's a cult spin in there starting at around the second episode that's relevant to our studies here. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So, just one last thing I wanted to mention with the motivational framing. If you go here, I'll share it with you. If you go to those Life magazine pictures again, you see there's some actual fun stuff that they do. Where is it? Oh yes, here it is. This is this is a dance that they organized for this, and I guess we call them the students who are learning how to do sit-ins. There's even it's like a name for it. The Picket Polka. The Picket Polka provided moments of relief. You know, you should, and this is, you know, just a kind of a, I would call it a soup, a baked soup. It's not soup. It's just kind of a basic lesson for people, you know, in movements. Make the movement fun, right? Make people want to participate. You know, of course, to some extent, you can do that through you know, making people believe that this is really important, life transforming work that they're doing, but make it fun as well, right? So, you know, various social movements will have various dimensions of making it fun. I think it was bread and circuses is a little bit of what I was looking for. I mean, not necessarily, you know, in the governmental sense of it, but literally feeding people. Again, you know, as you guys know, like people will come to club meetings, are more likely to come to club meetings if they are getting fed. There is, yes, good, sensitive and violent, yeah, and especially I guess with yeah, with people and animals. Yeah, so there should be some trigger warning there.
All of the memes that are on the internet, have you seen all of the ones about the cat? It's so funny. There's like so many like blaming coronavirus on Carol, whatever her name is.
Poor Carol Baskin, man. Yeah.
I know, and like people are pretending to be her and like putting like huge like little decorations on their head, like little wreaths. Yeah, to pretend to be like a little flower crown, but it's like a big old wreath that you put on your door or something.
Oh my goodness. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there. Yeah. It will be infinitely memed, but I think there is also there's some real sociological lessons in there as well about you know,
And psychological.
and psychological for sure.
Yeah.
Right. We'll be mining this one for years. Good.
Yes.
Okay. So unless there are further questions about framing and Morris in specific, I'm not sure. Am I still presenting? I am presenting. I'm going to unpresent. Okay. Now, what I want you to do, and this is going to be a little bit difficult. So I've got a dozen of you here, and I've got a list of, so if you go to open up Moodle for our class, and you'll see that under the 331, there is a midterm review. And what I would like you to do, wow, how to do this? How many? Okay, well, I'm gonna have to count. Bear with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Six. All right, so there are 44 key concepts. And I should say, I'm not, the exam is going to be just an essay exam. So I'm not going to be testing you directly on like, you know, explain what a strategy is. But I think these are all tools that you should have in your toolkit for analyzing social movements and discussing social movements. So, a typical essay question would be like, what is, how does resource mobilization theory look at social movements? Give, 3 examples of, how a movement draws on certain resources to do what they do. Something along those lines. But basically, applying the concepts that we learn in general to specific movements. So using those articles that we have read. And so now I'm looking at 44 topics here with a dozen of you. So 44 divided by 12 is 3 or 4? 3? No. Yeah, 3. Okay, that's an odd number. So I'm gonna ask most of you to do. I ask several of you to do four topics, and several of you to do 3 topics, and we'll see if I can keep track of that. Probably not, but we'll make the best of it. So what I would like to do is, you're doing this on the forums here. So on the on the forum that's called Midterm Review, that thing that I've pinned there, so you can reply to it. And so what I would like you to do is I'll assign you a few topics, a few topics, definitions to define. So add a definition and an example from the empirical cases that we've studied, if you can. And hopefully that will work. And so I'm going to assign you right now. So listen up. Okay, Eliza, I'm going to get a piece of paper to write this down. Okay, so yes, if you're, please listen. I want Eliza to do social movement through social, economic, and environmental harms. I want Aldon to do grievances through framing. I would like Chloe to do the state through social movement. I would like Emily to do social movement industry through new social movements. Katie, please take protest waves through research methods. Linnea will be classical movements theory through rational choice theory. Lena, you're going to have last was rational choice theory. Lena, you're going to have free rider through power devaluation theory. Tia will be adherence through activist organizations. And then I got a little lazy towards the end. So, wait, did Tia? Okay. Nicole, please do. Wait, I missed Maddie, didn't I? Maddie, please do the three forms of capital and biographical availability. And then, oops. Okay, Nicole, please do. I think they're all on a line here. Is that right? Yeah, Nicole, please do the frame bridging, amplification, frame extension, frame transformation, that one line. Those are all different. Sarah, you've got that other line, diagnostic, prognostic, and motivational framing. And, oops, what happened? And, oops, sorry. Who's last? Last but not least, Tess, right, Tess. Do those last three concepts. So frame centrality, frame vulnerabilities, and tactical repertoire. So please write those up as replies to the to this forum post, right? So we can sort of view and share that. And again, the idea is to write definitions, and if you can think of from the, especially from the articles in Goodwin and Jasper that we've read, think about empirical applications, right? So actual movements that we have studied. And let me look in the chat if you have questions.
Yeah, wait, I missed my computer shut down. What are we?
Oh, no. Is this Eliza talking?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're assigned to the first, I think, 4 concepts. So social movement through social, economic, and environmental harms.
Okay, and then we're just looking at like the definition and applying it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then posting it?
Yeah, and then post it in this forum on Moodle, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and if you missed anything while I was reading through that list, just mention something in chat, and I did write it down.
Are we meeting on Thursday still for class?
No. I will post the exam questions in the morning as, I guess, basically as a Moodle quiz or something like that. And yeah, and then you can just work through class time or at your own discretion.
Okay.
Right. So I'd like, if you can, in the next like 5 minutes, like by 5 after, to upload something. But you're more than welcome. You're encouraged to continue working on this document. Look at what other people have written, add to, or respond to their posts to say like, oh yeah, but look at this, or remember this is also in such and such an article. So not really but I would like you to submit something by the end of the session, and hopefully within the next few minutes, just so I can kind of talk through a few of these before we have to go on to whatever respective things we have to do in other times. Yeah, you can definitely continue to edit afterwards. Oh yeah, right. And even if you reply, you can press the button that'll let you edit your response for up to, I think it may put some funny time limit on that, like 2 hours or something like that. But again, if you don't like what you wrote or you want to add to it, you can always reply to your own message afterwards.
So are we posting it on Moodle?
Yes, on Moodle in response to that midterm review forum post.
Okay, sweet. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just going to scroll through, talk through a few of these that are up already. Again, please continue. Post something soonish, so folks can share and learn from each other. And certainly feel free to keep responding, replying, editing. As you do your preparation. Again, the midterm will be opened up on Thursday morning, and you'll have until I think 5 o'clock on Thursday to complete a couple essays. Okay, so just looking here at maybe share what I'm looking at. Share my entire screen. Share. Okay. I am presenting my screen, and here is looking at diagnostic and prognostic and motivational framing. I think we covered those today, didn't we? Sort of, not diagnostic, right? Identifying the problem, good, prognostic, solutions, right? And also, you know, with prognostic, remember, yeah, as you kind of write here in the quotations, you know, it is soluble. Right, this problem can be solved is an important part of the work of any movement. Can be identified for all movements, right? And you know, try to think about specific movements. Again, this sit-ins article is a good place to do that. But again, most of the articles have something there, right, for you. Protest waves, good. Arab Spring is a good example. Revolutions, yes, oh, good. Successful and not successful, right? So Syria as a sort of a counter example, right? Major change within a society, though, being the point. Transnational movements, good. Trade protests are a good example. ISIS, right? Okay. Yeah, qual and quant, you know, and I'm not sure I would necessarily ask a question about research methods. I haven't really made it a big focus here, but you might want to sort of just think about that in terms of how it, you know, within the context of certain given articles, you know, different methods allow us to see different things. So, you know, especially think about that. Think about that article on the Workers' Party. Who was that? That was that woman with the difficult name. Sorry. Yeah, the Lalich article on True Believers, right? You know, where she got to do really in-depth ethnography because she was a member. She was a true believer in the movement. Also, though, you know, might want to think like, well, but did that hide certain things from her, right? And then, yeah, classical theory. And again, we're not super focused on classical theory in this course, right? But the focus was right on psycho strain and that sort of thing. More focusing now on right, RM, resource mobilization. Do concentrate. I don't think I really put too much down here in the key concepts. There are a few, you know, in terms of like adherents, constituents, but you know, have some of that terminology that McCarthy and Zald put together for resource mobilization. So think about the kinds of resources. Political opportunities model, good, right? Remembering that, right? Well, political opportunities and threats, and just right, the attention to formal political structure, that political process. Models, political process theory requires us to consider. And RCT, you know, and certainly remember with RCT that limit that's connected to that idea of the free rider problem. Okay, this is all looking pretty good, you guys. Sorry, I'm going to have to sign off now, but again, I encourage you to keep working on this. If you have specific questions for me, please let me know via email. And again, I will be posting that midterm on Thursday and plan to do it on Thursday. So set aside some time for yourselves to write a couple of essays. Today's session will be available on YouTube later in the day, and a link will go up on Moodle. And okay, it was good seeing you all virtually, and I'll be in touch.